Hey, honey. Yeah. It was a good presentation. I did well. I think it was well received. But, yeah, it's another late night at work. Yeah, no, I wouldn't hold up. No, it'll be fine. I would just lock up. It'll be fine.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Pastor Ken. Welcome to the second part of the series we're doing, Tempted. It's an irresistible series. Something that all of us deal with, but listen, as we begin today, John Snow was a physician in Great Britain, and he was the first one to create the theory that cholera, which was a deadly intestinal disease that was fatal, that it was contracted by drinking contaminated water, specifically water that was contaminated by sewage. Now, the problem that he had at the time was all the other physicians and scientists of that day believed that it was an airborne reality. The cholera was the result of miasma, which was an ancient theory that said that pollution in the air, that this was a respiratory condition that you contracted through polluted air or for bad air. But you see, John Snow believed that truly the source of this disease was, again, contaminated water. And in 1854, there was an outbreak of cholera that started in the Soho section of London, the area in which he lived. And so he began to put his theory to the test, and he discovered that all the people who had contracted the cholera had drank from the Broad Street pump that was located in Soho. Even though people had gotten it in a few other places around London, what he discovered in his investigation is that they had once lived in the region and loved the water that came from the Broad Street pump and bottled it and took it home to enjoy. And then a minister by the name of John Wanhead, he thought that the disease was created and founded by demonic forces. And so he went to prove John Snow wrong, and what he uncovered was this, that one of the people in his parish, a woman, had been cleaning her baby's diapers in the town well. And it contaminated the water. 616 people died as the result of it. See, but as long as people believed that cholera was the result of air respiratory condition, they would have never sought to find the true source behind this end of it. How many of you have ever attempted to control your weight? Anybody here, you ever want to, you wanted to lose weight, you want to control your weight? Growing up, I'd always try to eat healthy and all, and I had come to believe as I got older that the real problem with weight control was the issue of fat. Fat in the American diet. And a lot of people believe, like I did, that we needed to have a low-fat diet. But as I got older, men tend to hold their weight generally around their waist area. And my wife and I encountered a friend of ours who had gone on a program called Ideal Protein. It's administered by a physician. And so we decided, both of us, hey, let's do this. Let's try this out. And what we discovered in the midst of it was that the real culprit, the real problem was that the American diet was so filled with carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates are good because you get energy from it. You know, as an athlete, I grew up and, you pack your carbs and you have all the things. But the problem is this. When you overeat carbohydrates, your body produces insulin. And insulin is what causes those carbohydrates to be stored as fat because your body believes that you're going to need the energy. And so when you eat a highly carbohydrate-centric diet, your body is continually producing insulin and storing fat that you don't actually use. And so we began to discover that, with food combinations and other things like that, and how to put your body into ketosis where you actually use what you're storing. But you see, the whole deal was this. Until we discovered what the source of the problem was, you couldn't address it. You couldn't deal with it. And so in this, we've been in a series that we started called Temptation. And we discovered something last week that anytime we're tempted, there's always more at stake than we think. In fact, in every temptation, there's more that's going on than we know in the moment. In the moment, we don't see all of that's happening. But there's always more going on. There's always something greater. In fact, what we uncovered last week was this, that every temptation is a test of our faith. Now, why? Because temptation, this is the definition I gave us for the course of this series. Temptation is an offer to satisfy us apart from God. It's an offer to satisfy us apart from God. That's why it's always a test of our faith. Because can God be trusted? Does God care? Is God trying to hold something out on me? Is God able and is He willing to meet my needs? And so that's what we wrestle with. That's what we deal with when we come to it. And so if you're taking notes with me today, to win the fight against temptation, we need to discover and confront the source. Discover and confront the source. And people say immediately, well, temptation. I know what the source is. The source is Satan. The source is the devil. But we're going to discover something today. If you have a Bible, I'd like you to turn with me to the book of James. The book of James, okay? If you don't have a Bible with you, the scriptures will be on the screen. They're also on your notes that are contained in your bulletin. But as you follow along, we're going to discover something that James unfolds for us that's critical in the battle against temptation. Because you and I need to we need to discover what the true source is so we can confront it, so that we can deal with it. And so James starts off here. In James chapter 1 and verse 13, he says this, when tempted. Now stop there for a moment. Notice he didn't say if tempted. He said when tempted. And why did he say that? Because every one of us are tempted. Whether you're a Christ follower or not, whether you've bought into the whole faith thing or not, all of us as human beings are subjected to things to which we wrestle with to attempt to control in our lives. Things that sometimes, whether we like to admit it or not, that we lose the battle to. Things that we want to do more of, but yet when we are faced with temptations, we find ourselves doing things that we don't want to do, things that we wish we could stop doing. We're mean to somebody. We say something we shouldn't say. We want to control our mouth more, but we find ourselves saying things that we regret later or having to deal with afterward. We all deal with temptations in different areas. Notice he said, when tempted, because temptation is not something that you can avoid in life. We will all face it. It's when you are tempted, not if you were tempted. Jesus himself was tempted. So in other words, you can't be so good that you'll never be tempted in life. People say, I just wish temptation could be removed from me altogether, but that's not going to happen. You can't avoid temptation. But let me help you with this. Here's the good news. But you can defeat it. You can beat it. You can overcome it. You do not need to succumb to it. As Jesus defeated temptation, you and I can learn about it, and we can overcome the things that we tend to stumble on. They can become stepping stones to greater things that God wants to do in our lives. And it's all about understanding it. And so let me go through today. I put this in your notes. Let's look at temptation for a moment, because temptation is a process. This is how it happens in our lives if we were to think about it, if we were to analyze it. And I want to look at it this. It always begins with a thought. Martin Luther, the great theologian, the catalyst that began the great Reformation, faith Reformation. Martin Luther said this: I cannot stop birds from flying over my head, but I certainly can stop them from building nests in my hair. In other words, you and I cannot stop thoughts from coming to us, but it's all about what we do with the thoughts when they come to us. See, if you discover where temptation begins, it's far easier to deal with it when it's a seed than it is when it's grown up. In other words, it's easier to stop a seed to be planted than allowing something to grow, mature, and build roots and then try to pull it out after. Because we know that anything that we've succumbed to again and again and again, we realize those are the hardest battles for us to overcome. But it always begins with a thought. Something comes into our mind. We think about something, wow, okay? And then it can go from a thought, it begins with a thought that becomes an imagination. An imagination. In other words, we begin to think about it. We begin to see ourselves doing what we're thinking about. It's that second look. It's that going back to it. The thought might be, hey man, there's a piece of cake in the fridge. But then all of a sudden we remember how good the cake tasted, how rich it was, what a work of art my wife had done. I would do an injustice to her not to enjoy this. And then what happens is this: it's an imagination. It's something that begins to grow. Now listen, imaginations in themselves are benign because they can work for you or against you. God tells us that when we meditate on His Word, we can see ourselves doing it. We imagine the reality of what God says about it is true, and we can actually see ourselves go out and do those ends. But on the opposite end, when it comes to things that lead us down paths we don't want to go down, to things that we would consider to be evil, that we regret, that we feel ashamed about, those imaginations, though, begin with us seeing ourselves being fulfilled. Remember, temptation is the offer to fulfill us apart from God. And so we begin to see it, and that's why the Bible teaches us we're to cast down imaginations. Why? Because they become strongholds. Because why? If you don't deal with it at the imagination level, then the next thing is this: it begins as a thought, it becomes an imagination, and then it can lead us to a justification. What is that? That's when we start rationalize the reasons why we should have it. Once we're convinced that this will fulfill us, aren't we amazing? We can justify anything. What do I mean by that? Come up with a case why we should. I mean, other people are doing it and nothing's happened to them. Why can't I do that? I mean, I deserve it. I've been working hard. Why can't I do this? I've been going at it all this time. I deserve it. I mean, they even throw the God card down on you. God wants me to be happy. God made me this way, right? So what starts as a thought can become an imagination, and it leads to a justification. Aren't we masters at coming up with excuses and reasons and rationales why we should have just about anything? We can talk ourselves into anything, can we not? And we can come up with the reasons and all the justifications as to why we should do this. And so it starts as a thought, becomes an imagination, leads to a justification, and ultimately, listen, it leaves us with a choice. Leaves us with a choice. You see, when you allow all of that, when you're faced, we're always, and here's the good news, you always have a choice. The devil can't make you do anything. Nobody else can make you do anything. We always have a choice. We always have a reason, and God only holds us responsible for the things we choose to do, okay? Being tempted is not a sin. But what do you do with it? Because it'll always leave you down. Will you eat? Will you partake? Will you do it? Will you go? Will you engage? The choice is always ours. We're not just, complying, just going along with everything. We are making actively a choice. It always leaves us with a choice because ultimately it can become a sin. That choice can become a sin. See, it's never a sin till you actually engage it, till you actually allow what's being offered to you to become a part of it. Think about it this way. If you have a trouble, being responsible with money. Maybe your weakness is clothing, okay? And all of a sudden, a thought hits you. Man, look at the dress she's wearing. Look at the jeans he's got on. And you go, wow. And all of a sudden, just a thought, innocent at first. And then you start saying, man, I could see myself in the new outfit. Man, and you start to imagine yourself going out to buy something. Maybe even click on a couple of websites and you look at some of the fashion trends. And then what? Immediately on his front, you got this justification. Well, I haven't bought anything in a week. I got to have something new. I don't want to look outdated. I work hard. I got to have it. I got to stay up with the times. I got to stay in the trend. I got to do this, right? And you have all the justification. You have all the rationalizations, right? And then all of a sudden it leaves you with the choice. Well, I'm leaving work today. I heard there was a sale down at fill in the blank. It leaves you with a choice. And then when you head down there, what? You buy, and usually not one, you come home with bags. And if you're married, you usually hide the bags. Okay? Because if you're irresponsible, it doesn't happen that way. It always starts with a thought that becomes an imagination that leads to a justification that leaves us with a choice. And if we partake in it, that choice can become a sin. And that's that way in anything, whether it's cheating on a test, whether it's engaging in dishonest business practices, whether it's eating. We have this, it starts with a thought, and we've been trying to hold it, but that thought becomes an imagination, and we see that is so fulfilling. And then all of a sudden we justify, well, I don't know why I'm trying so hard. I mean, God must have made me this way. And then we have, right? And then it's a choice. And then it's those afterwards that we begin to regret it. I remember years ago, when our church was younger, our former senior pastor, Pastor Milletta, came on a Friday night. We had Friday night services back then. And I was new in my faith and all, and I was coming, and all of a sudden on Friday night he goes, we're going to have a fast. This next week, we're going to fast. And I was kind of new to all this in Christianity, and one of my best friends, we decided we worked together. We're like, yeah, let's get in. We're going to engage in this. We're going to fast. So we fasted the whole week. Came to church on Friday night. And then something happened that neither one of us were prepared for. As Pastor Millett got up and said, guess what, friends? We're going to fast another week. We're like, what? Are you kidding me? We haven't eaten this week. Another week. But we determined we're going to do this. So we went 2 weeks. Okay? I wish I could say when I came to church on Friday night that I was paying attention to his message, but all I could think about was the service ending and the ability to go out and eat afterwards, okay? And that's what I thought about. So my friend and I had this deal. Like, we're not even wait to get home. We're just going to hit a pizzeria up around the corner and get some food. So immediately when the service ended, we were out the back jack. We were at the pizzeria. Our order was in. When they delivered it, it was all hot. We didn't even wait for it to cool off. We were burning our mouth as we're eating it, jamming all this pizza down, okay, soda and all the rest. And then I go home, okay? Now, it was so hard that week because my sister, I was watching her house for her, and generally she was gone during the week, but this particular week, she had been home. And my sister's a phenomenal cook, and she had made all this food, and it was sitting in the fridge. So I had this thought, well, I ate pizza. I didn't really have any protein. So I'm watching these Christian programs at night because I was always a late night person. I'm like, you know what? She made these pork chops, and my sister made her homemade applesauce to die for. So I go and I make this big plate of pork chops and applesauce, and I eat all that. And then I have this thought, as I had gotten the food, I noticed she made homemade chocolate chip cookies. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, it would be I wouldn't be a good brother if I didn't show my faith. So I went and I made myself a plate of chocolate chip cookies and ate them, okay? And as I brought my plate back and I'm watching John Osteen on TV, as I was putting it away, all of a sudden I noticed at the corner of my eye something I hadn't seen before. She made carrot cake? Oh my goodness! So I cut myself a piece of carrot cake. Has anybody ever binged before on it? Okay. And so I took this carrot cake and I'm eating in the other room. And I can't eat another bite. I get halfway through it. I was watching the show. Okay, and I said, oh, I need to put this aside, right? And all of a sudden, the program ends. John Osteen's over. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, okay, let me put the plates away before I go to bed. And I notice my plate there was still a half of uneaten piece of carrot cake. And it would be a sin to throw that away. So I ate it, okay? Now, I won't tell you the details of what happened because I found myself in the bathroom for the next hour and a half afterwards, okay? Because what goes in has to come out one way or another. And the reality of it is, how many times have we engaged through the process point that afterwards we find ourselves unfulfilled what we thought was going to delay and deliver on a promise for us, right? So listen. Let's look back at the scripture again. James 1 and verse 13, he said, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. Now, he's making it known, God's never your problem. God's always your solution. People attempt to blame God. Maybe you've been in that situation and said, well, God made me this way. Of course, God would understand. God would want me to, and we have all these reasons and rationales, and some people say, well, you know what? And I've ministered to people where they have told me, well, you know what? God shouldn't have made us this way. If God didn't want us to do it, he shouldn't have even allowed us to have a desire for it. And how do you know it's not God? We go through all this stuff. But he's making it clear to us. God's never your problem. And here's the truth is, no matter what, any temptation you face, God is always with you in it. And God is always faithful to make the way of escape. He's always in there. In fact, in week 4, we're going to deal with the whole idea is why does God even allow temptation? Because there is something good in it. Because there's something we learn, there's something we can grow through, there's something we can't. But God is never your problem. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil. Remember, evil, it's the opportunity to be satisfied apart from God. God is never tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But look at this. This next word is so critical. But. Aren't you glad God butted in? But, okay? Each person, what's he talking about? He's talking about every one of us. Every one of us that is sitting here today, right now, this scripture is talking to you. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their, what? Own evil desire and enticed. I found this interesting. The word enticed, literally back in Greek, it comes from the term where we get bait from. As a fisherman, when you fish, you put a hook in the bait. The bait's something that looks good to the fish, right? Whether it's a worm, whether it's a salmon egg, whether it's a lure, something along those lines, it looks good, but there's always something in it. There's always something that when you partake of it, it'll draw you back. It's something that doesn't tell you all up front. It promises you something it doesn't deliver on. But what is the source of it? You see, this is something we don't deal well with. It's our own evil desire. That's what gives the opportunity for our enemy to entice us. And look at verse 15. Then, after desire has conceived. In other words, when you have actually partaken of the offer, when you've eaten it, when you've partook of it, when you did what you were tempted to do, when you gave in, after desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. When people say, you mean physically die? No, listen to me. There's a lot of deaths we can experience in life. You partake of temptation, you get into it, you can kill your reputation, you can kill your innocence. You might lose your job. You might you might destroy relationships in your life. There are so many things that can die along the way that we don't understand. Because why? There's always more at stake when we're tempted than we think. And there's always more that we don't know that's going on in the moment when it's happening. Because it's always a test of our faith. Can we trust God? Can God deliver on this for us? Does God care? Because when tempted, here's the question that we have to ask. Is God holding out something on me? Is God trying to keep something from me that I think is good? That somehow he's trying to hold it out. He's not wanting to give me something that's good. I mean, everybody else is doing it. Everybody else is seemingly having fun. Why can't I? Can God be trusted? That's at the heartbeat of every temptation because it's an offer to satisfy you apart from God. But let's look at this more deeply, because here's the big thought today. If you're taking notes with me, look at our desire is the problem. We need to identify that. So you need to discover what it is so you can confront it. You can deal with it. Our desire is the problem. Now notice, and only when you own it only when we own it can we dethrone it. You understand what I mean by that? Only when it belongs to you can you deal with it. If it's not yours, you can't deal with it. And what do I mean by that? It's amazing for us that when we have partaken, when we have sinned, when we have gone that way, we have this tremendous ability to blame others, to deny it, to hide it, to attempt to sweep it under the rug. That when people do something, they say, well, I don't know why I did that. That's just not me. I don't get it. See, as long as you deny it, you will never be able to deal with it. In fact, let me help you with this, because people struggle on this front. As long as you're a victim, you can't do anything about it. It's society's fault. It's the cop's fault. It's my parents' fault. It's somebody else's fault. Well, if somebody else is at fault, then you can't do anything about it. It denies you of any opportunity to be free from it. But recognize this. You have to own it before you can dethrone it. Nobody made you do anything. We are masters that when we're in that moment, when we have done wrong, we try to look at what happened somewhere else, what somebody else did. We pick up and say, well, you know what? They did this or they did that. All to try to not deal with what's going on inside of me. But let me help you with this. Listen carefully to me. Until you own it, you cannot dethrone it. You cannot stop its power that will work in you until you own up to it. Till you say, you know what? Yeah, that's mine. It may be ugly. It may be something we don't like. It may be something that's disdainful. But you got to say, you know what? I did it. No, I was at fault. I was wrong. Do you ever have people, come to you and try to apologize to you, that at the end of their apology, you wonder, number one, what were they apologizing about? And number two, were they actually saying, really you were at fault and I had no part in this, but I'm saying sorry to you because I think I ought to, but let me help you to understand. It's really my parents' fault, it's your fault, it's everybody else's fault. And where do we get that from? Didn't God ask Adam, Adam, what'd you do? Who, me? Yo, wait a minute, God. Let me tell you what's going down. Okay? It was you and that woman that you made for me. I couldn't help it. Okay? Yes, she offered it to me, but it's your fault. It's her fault. Tame me. It's somebody else. Okay? Devil made me do it. No. Till you own it, you can't dethrone it. In fact, tell the person next to you, till you own it, you can't dethrone it. Tell the other person that you didn't prefer on the other side, till you own it, you can't dethrone it. Oh, it's true. You got to say, you know what? That was me. I was jealous. I gossiped. Whatever the situation is. Because until you own it, you can't dethrone it. You got to deal with it. You can't deal with it if it's not yours. See, if you complain about your neighbor's dog, oh, it's so untamed. It's so untrained. Oh, it barks all the time. Well, it's your neighbor's dog. You can't do nothing about that. And that's the way we treat sometimes the areas for where we've sinned. Well, my parents were this way. Society is this way. This has always been this way. And we make excuses. We make rationalizations. We deny it. Denial is not a river in Egypt. Denial is a problem that we have to deal with that says, you know what? Till I own it, till I look in the mirror and say, no. You did it. Listen, even if 98% of the fault was on somebody else's, if you don't take responsibility for the 2% that's yours, you will continue to repeat that again and again and again. It's not until you own it that you can dethrone it. It's not until you're willing to say, you know what, that's me. I may not be pretty, because we are masters at putting lipstick on pigs, are we not? We go to saying, well, it's really not my fault, and we try to do. Why? Because until you own it, you can't dethrone it. Let me go a little deeper for you. See, one of the things we've never really looked at is why are we even attracted? See, last week, remember I said your temptations, are based on our hungers are what make us vulnerable. And when you dissect it, sometimes innocent hungers, things that we truly want, because God did make us this way, that we don't recognize, that sometimes we haven't even looked at. What were we looking at? Example, maybe I hunger for intimacy or love and affection, but I'm trying to find it through sexual experiences. They don't work. It doesn't happen that way. But you see, until I've dissected, what am I actually looking for? What am I truly hungering? Because God has a way to meet the need that I have that's legitimate inside. But here's where the problem lies. And this is how despicable, so disgusting our enemy is. He will use your own body against you. What do I mean by that? Let me ask. Once you've been offered something that will satisfy you apart from God, and you have partaken of it, the Bible tells us that sin has pleasure for a season. Now, why is that important? Because listen to me. Your brain doesn't know any better. What happens is this. When you engage in something that offers to fulfill you apart from God, that when you experience that situation, what happens is this. The pleasure center of your brain is affected. And all of a sudden, your brain releases opiates. The number one of them is dopamine. So whether it's overeating, do you know that when I was studying that this week, that food companies in America spend millions and millions of dollars of creating foods, junk foods, that are no good for you, but that are irresistible. That once you've eaten one, you can't stop. You want more. You're always hungering for it. You're always desiring more of it. And it is the truth in so many different areas, because addictive behaviors always go back to something that when they experienced it, the reward center of their brain released all of these opiates into it, and something was impressed. There was an imaging in it. There was a remembrance. That there are so many things you do that you're not conscious of doing in your life. Meaning, you get up every day, you brush your teeth. You could go through that unconsciously. The way you drive to work, do you ever decide you were going to go a different way and you find yourself, oh my goodness, I'm just because you're on autopilot most of the time. Most of the decisions we get in, your brain is automatically making determinations and decisions because you taught it where to find reward, where to find pleasure. And that's why the Bible teaches us that the only way to transform your life is through the renewing of your mind. To realize that you can retrain your brain. But until you own it, you can't deal with it. Till you own it, you can't dethrone it. You have to recognize, I've taught myself to go this direction. I have yielded again and again and again. And that's what Romans 6 tells us, that when you come to sin, and you've done it again, when you've partaken, nobody's addicted to cigarettes on their first puff. They only become addicted because they continue to do something that all of a sudden they create a craving for internally. And that's where you have to be honest, because what your enemy seeks to do is exploit your cravings, your own evil desires. It's yours, nobody else's. And until you own it, you can't deal with it. Till you own it, you can't stop it. Till you own it, you can't dethrone it. You can't kick it off and say, no more. You're not ruling my life anymore. Until you own it, God can't get into the situation, because guess what? If you don't own it, you can't give it to God. If it's your mama's problem, if it's your neighbor's problem, if it's somebody else's problem, then you can't truly give that to God, because you don't own it. You can only give away what you possess. And if it's that's where we are constantly as a society, blaming everybody else. I coined this phrase even to our staff years ago. I said, it's the man with the mask. You're like, who left the kitchen a mess? Well, me. No, and nobody takes responsibility. Not my fault, right? But until you own it, you can't dethrone it, okay? You need to understand that, because why? How do you handle it then? How do you handle it? Once you're ready to say, you know what, that's mine. No way. I'm not going to put it off anymore. I want to win this war. I've discovered what the problem is, and I'm ready to confront it. How do I confront my desires? Because when I own it, when it's mine, I can deal with it. So let me teach you how to deal with it. Number one, if you're taking notes with me, how do you deal with your desires? Number one, you have to admit it. And that's hard for us. You have to admit it. You know the first person you have to admit it to? It's yourself. You know, they teach you in AA, people who have had addictive behaviors in their life. I always think of AA because when someone joins AA, and so many people have gotten help that way, but there are divine principles that people encounter, which is this. When you come into AA, you have to say, listen, my name is so-and-so, and this is my problem. It's nobody else's problem. It's not because of a bad marriage. It's not because of my upbringing. No, I have a problem with alcohol, me. Okay? You have to admit it. We call that in Christianity confession. Okay? But I like to say it today, admission, because you have to admit something. You have to say, yeah, that's my problem. And why do you have to tell yourself first? Because we have this tremendous way of deceiving our own selves. We believe it's everybody else's problem. No, you need to look right in the mirror and say, no. Today I've discovered you's the problem. And we're going to deal with this. Okay? But you got to admit it to yourself. Number two, you got to admit it to God. See, once you admit it to God, you can get forgiveness for it. See, think about this. If you went to God and you asked God to forgive you, but you never took responsibility for what you did, what's he actually forgiving you of? Until you say, no, that's my sin. No, I did that. It's nobody else's. Yeah, I went along with all those people. Yeah, I was involved in that situation. Yeah, I was in the deal. I never learned how to use money because my parents did it. No, I was around a bunch of people that did dishonest business deals and No. I made the choice. I did it. Until you own it, you can't dethrone it. Admit it. Admit it to God because God will forgive you. The Bible says if we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So I got to admit it. The third person I got to admit it to is I got to find someone I can trust. What do I mean by trust? Someone who's got discretion. Okay? That means somebody that I can confide in. And I need to tell somebody else. See, God never told us to do this alone. And that's part of your problem. As long as you keep it in the dark, you'll continue to repeat it because the enemy works in the dark. But there has to come a point when you believe in, trust in, give it to somebody else to say, why? Because the Bible teaches us this. We can go to God and get forgiveness, but if you want freedom, here's what the scriptures teach. In James 5:16, it says, confess your sins one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. And I like to say this, and made whole. The way you unplug it, the way you take away its power, you put it out in the light and look at it for what it is. And once you're willing to go to that degree, you're on the way to freedom. So you got to admit it. Number two, you got to submit it. Submit it. The word submission literally means to put under something else. To submit to something means to come under the authority, to come under the regulation or outlook or thinking or whatever the case may be. See, when you come to it, we need to submit it to God. In other words, God's way of thinking. Because when we look at our desires, how did God intended your desires to be met? When you look at your life, what's God's view of money? What's God's view of relationships? What's God's view of sex? What's God's view of food? See, some of you, instead of living to eat, you begin to eat to live. And that might mean changing a whole lot of stuff that you like to eat, that you begin to eat the right things that will actually cause you to live better. But if pleasure is at the heartbeat of it, that this is going to provide, if we're honest about it. So many things that we partake of, it had a momentary euphoric effect. We have comfort foods, we call it, right? Because your brain released those opiates. But then you realize, oh my goodness, it didn't tell me I was going to keep this for a while, right? That good feeling goes, right? And then you got to clean up the mess. No, you got to submit it. Because anything you give to God, the things that God gives you, you'll never regret. The things that God gives you will never bring shame. The things that God gives you, you'll never have to hide from. The things that God gives you, you can go out in the light with because God has the best interest at heart for you. The truth is, can you trust Him? Because why? Temptation is always a test of your faith. Therefore, you need to submit it to God. God, I'm going to entrust myself into your way of thinking. Guys, in fact, I put this in your notes, I wrote this prayer. It's a prayer of consecration. It's a prayer that I've learned to pray. It's something I wrote for you, but listen to what I wrote here. If you begin to pray this, I'm telling you, it can make a difference. I wrote this, say, God, I choose today to submit my whole being to you. I submit my mind to you. May I walk with the mind of Christ. Help me today to think only on the things that are excellent, pure, noble, authentic, gracious, and true. Give me the power to only think on things that are consistent with your truth. God, I submit my ears to you today. May I only let into my soul things that are consistent with your truth. Give me the wisdom not to allow lies in, but to only believe the truth. I submit my eyes to you. May I only look on things that are pure. God, I submit my mouth to you, that my words would be pleasing to you. May they bring glory to you and build others up. May I only speak truth and not falsehood, so that my words bring life and not death. I give my heart to you, God, and submit it to you, acknowledging it can be deceptive. And so I ask you to give me a pure heart. May my motives be pure in serving you so that I can bring glory to you in all I do. God, I submit my hands to you. May they only be used to build people up and to build your church and kingdom on earth. God, I submit my feet to you. May they only go places that are pleasing to you. God, I submit every part of my body to you today. My life is yours. Use it as you see fit. See, the more you begin to pray about it, the more you begin to become conscious of it. Martin Luther, the great theologian, again said this: every true man of God needs three things: prayer, meditation, and temptation. Prayer, that means talking to God. Meditation means hearing from God. And temptation is where you trust in God. Where you believe that the ability to overcome the situations in the world do not rest in your strength and capability, but God in you, working through you to achieve his will on earth. It's those times that we're reminded how desperately we need God. But if we would begin to pray that more regularly, it would help us. Because why? James 4:7 says this: submit yourself therefore to God. It always begins here. Submit yourself therefore to God. And do what? Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. You're not ready to say no to sin, to say no to the devil, until you first submit to God. Because in yourself, you don't have the power or the ability to overcome it. We need God, but it always begins. I got to admit it. I got to submit it. Because when I do, when I resist the devil and my desires have been submitted to God, then the Bible tells us that the devil will flee from you. I love it. In Greek, it means he will run from you in stark fear. Why? Because once your desire is submitted to God, the devil is not dealing with you anymore. He's dealing with your Father who is in heaven, who is ready to run him out of town and run him out of the situations of your life. But until you agree with God, till you submit to God, see, God gave you a free will. You have a choice in the matter. You can choose God, or you can choose to go your own way. The choice is always yours. Thirdly, you need to redirect it. What do I mean by that? Well, see, if we have been partaking of it in certain fashions, and we've been experiencing pleasure from ways that we've been going about doing it, and then regretting it and feeling bad about it afterwards, now we need to take a hold of, understand what that desire is, and find out what God says and redirect it. Maybe I have a problem with greed. And I don't ever even call it that. I said, well, I'm just frugal. I'm just careful with money. No, sometimes we're just about getting stuff for ourselves. And God begins to allow us to experience generosity. And anybody who's ever made this transition can tell you that any momentary thing I bought to please myself is far more euphoric, far more rewarding when I've been the reason to help somebody else overcome or meet their need. Meeting my own needs is only one level of pleasure. But helping meet the needs of others is far more addictive. It's far more pleasurable. It's far greater. You can get addicted to that going, man, God, bless me some more so I can be a source of allowing other people to be blessed. This is so awesome because if we're honest about it, the things that we bought to please ourselves, a month later, we're not even paying attention to anymore. We kicked it to the side. All that stuff that's sitting in your closet that cost you, I don't know how much money they cost you, you ain't even I'm wearing today. There's so much more when you're able to be somebody else's source of meeting a need than meeting your own need. There's so much. See, when you redirect it, you begin to say, God, this is what you desire. This is how you wanted to meet this area of my life. This is the hunger, and this is what you desire to do it in. And you begin to redirect it. And lastly, listen, because you need to what? Admit it. You need to submit it. You need to redirect it. And this last one is you need to protect it. You need to protect it. What do I mean by that? Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23, look at what he said. Above all else, in other words, this is first priority. Above all else, guard your heart. God told Adam, listen, when he instructed Adam, he said, guard the garden. He told him to guard it. Why? Because you have an enemy. He seeks, walking about as a roaring lion, looking to devour your life. No, guard your heart, because he's going to exploit your areas of weakness. And if you haven't owned it, you can't dethrone it. You got to own it. You got to know it, because when you own it, then you can put up the barriers. You can say, no fishing here. You ain't coming. No trespassing. This is an area of my life that no, you don't own anymore. I have given this to God. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. So what do I mean by guarding it? There are simple things that you can do. Again, if you have a problem and you're not very good steward over your money, one of the simple things you can do is you can cancel all those subscriptions that are coming into your house. Looking at stuff going, wow, I want that, wow, I want that, wow, I want that. You're just feeding something that you can begin to control it. Maybe you have a problem with what you watch. You know, you can cancel your cable subscription, you won't die. You can filter your internet, or you can get rid of your internet, okay? There are so many things we can do. It's beginning to put up barriers. It's creating boundaries. You know, when you drive on the highway, what do they put up? Guardrails, right? And where do they put guardrails most? In the most dangerous places. And what's a guardrail designed to do? That if you hit it, your car may sustain a little damage, but you won't lose your life, okay? You need to have areas, because you need to have, listen to me, friends. Are you involved in a small group? You see, the people that you associate in your life determine the direction and quality of your life. That's one of the areas we can put up barriers. We can have accountability partners and say, you know what? This is where I struggle. I own this. This is my struggle. I've given it to God. Help me to walk this reality out. See, we're not supposed to do life alone. We can begin to put up protections. We can begin to make accommodations. You know, we might say, you know what? I'm not going out to dinner with anybody of the opposite sex alone. That's a good protection. That's a good barrier. You may just say, you know, there's just some things that I'm just not going to do. I don't care what everybody else is doing. Their fight might not be my fight. We're all tempted in different ways. When you own it, only then can you realize, what do I need to do to protect my heart? Because I'm susceptible. You know, if you've ever had a problem with alcohol, someone who's been a recovered alcoholic recognizes, man, if people sit around drinking, I can't sit there with them. I need to get up and remove myself out of the situation. That's not being less of a person. That's being wise. That's recognizing, you know what? I am not even going to allow the opportunity for the enemy to make an offer to me for something, because I know that that's my weakness. I am not going there. I'm not even going to get close to it. I'm not even going to get on the edge. That's where society tries to tell us. It tries to teach us to live out on the edge. But no, you have to begin to protect it. You need to be able to build boundaries around it. You need to say, so let me conclude on this. Listen, what areas do you need to admit? What thing do you struggle with the most? Remember we talked about, last week when we were saying it, I had you think about your biggest struggle, your biggest obstacle, your biggest stumbling block. What is it that you struggle with the most? You need to admit it. What is it you need to admit? What is it you need to submit to God? And look at God's way of handling it. What is it you need to redirect in your life? What is it you need to start taking the steps towards protecting in your life? What are we going to do with all of this? See, because you can win this battle. You can defeat this in your life. You can walk above it. You do not have to be controlled by something external. When you recognize the problem's in me and I can deal with this, because you know what? Your brain, God gave you your body. You can train your body to work for you, not against you. The Bible tells us that maturity as a Christian, a person who's mature, who through reason of use, Hebrews 5 tells us, has learned to discern good and evil. So in other words, I began to retrain because the things that I once gave into, now I'm going in the opposite direction. Now I'm building myself to recognize that my desires are met in God and God alone. Anything that's offered to me outside of Him, I'm not going for, because ultimately it's going to be a heartache. What momentary pleasure it might promise me, I will have to clean up and deal with the regret of later. So imagine with me for just a moment, if you began to live out your life and you had the guts today to say, you know what, I'm not going to blame anybody else. I'm going to admit it. I'm going to commit it. I'm going to submit it. I'm going to own it so I can dethrone it. I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to stop blaming everybody else. I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to own it because no longer is it going to sit on the throne of my heart. Jesus is Lord over my heart, and I can only give Him what I own, what I possess. I'm going to own it so I can dethrone it. Everybody bow your head and let's close your eyes for a moment. Let me pray for you. Father in heaven, give us the grace today to truly deal with these situations, to begin to tackle these fronts head on, to no longer allow the circumstances of life, the excuses that we've made, the deceptions that we have allowed in our own hearts, in our own lives to no longer hold the hand for us. We're willing to lay it all on the table today, Lord. We're ready to come clean, ready to own up to it. Yeah, that was me. Yeah, I've got a problem with, you fill in the blank. God, today I come to you. I admit it. I admit it to myself. I admit it to you. I'm going to admit it to someone I can trust. But today I'm going to submit it to you. I'm going to give it to you, Lord. Help me to redirect it and help me to protect it, because I today want to begin to win the war on temptation. I want to say today, in no uncertain terms, that no longer does Satan have a one-up on me, that I'm going to live my life free. I'm going to walk above. I'm going to live out the life that you designed and created me to live. Today, Lord, I'm willing to own it. I'm willing to own it so I can dethrone it.